Hello everyone, my name is Samira Lewis and I am one of the social mobilizers of V-TRaC's lab, which stands for Vulnerability, Trauma, Culture, and Resilience. This lab is directed by Dr. Jean-Marie Sena and focuses on mental health in Black communities. Today I do have the honor to present to you identity, success, and mental health in Black communities as we wrap up the school year full of exams, assignments, midterms, and much more. My colleague and I, les César Seux, will dive into the topic with our first pillar, identity.
So when we look at Black identities, actually stem from a political view ever since the 60s, governed by different Black activists. And those activists really wanted to push the message across all African descendants that they all deserve dignity and human respect. Because, for example, even today, certain Black individuals may find themselves constantly trying to prove their worth at their work, or constantly having to prove yourself wherever you're doing anything. It can really be quite draining. So that was really the purpose of their work. And so it was never really about the color of their skin or our skin, but mostly about the right to be self-naming, to be self-defining, to be self-determining, and exercising individual and collective agency. And that's why we often see Black people who are trying to identify themselves with organizations. So, for example, Black Lives Matter or Black Youth Project, or even here on campus, we have a club that's called Black Future Lawyers. So we can say that a Black identity is a self, and it's also a collectively conscious effort for people of African descent to be self-naming and to be self-defining in our roots to increase human respect and dignity. And that's why there is a heavy emphasis on capitalizing actually the B in Black people. And so we can go to the next slide. And here it's just a few things that makes our own identity that we mentioned. So we have our values, we have and culture, also political opinions and religious belief. We also have a sense of belonging. So, for example, here I think most of us go to uOttawa. So this can also be something that defines us. So while you're going to university, it doesn't have to be university, it can be anything else really. There is also memories and also your experiences. So yeah, there are a lot of things.
All right, now for our second pillar, which is success. I'd like to open up the room for to ask this open question. How would you define success? You can write it in the chat or you can open up your mic. But when you think of being successful, when you think of successful people, like what do you see? What do they look like?
I think I see it as like people who achieve their dreams or like one of their dreams.
Yes, absolutely. Achieving the sense of achieving the dreams and stuff. Yes. I saw in the chat somebody said happiness and reaching goals. Absolutely. Doing something which they love, something that's being fulfilled or rewarding. Yes, those are all amazing and very good points. As we go into the other slide, now we see Vid Lamonte Bugs Jr., founder and owner of VLB or VBG Enterprises. He defines success as obtaining happiness from achieving your goals. True success is not gained only from the achievement of our goals, but also from the happiness and satisfaction derived from pursuing those goals. However, I feel like society likes to tell us a different version of that story. It often defines success, which is the fact of getting and achieving wealth, respect, or fame, and the correct or desired result of that attempt. But there's honestly some people who may also define it as not having any of those things, or not being satisfied without having those things. That could be success for them. There's a lot of people, for example, they don't feel the need to have a degree to determine that they have a success, or they don't need to have children to determine that they are a successful person in this world. But in today's society, like I mentioned, we see success as having more degrees than our colleagues, having more wealth than our neighbors, having 1 million followers on social media accounts, or having high grades all throughout our academic career or year, or having a luxurious lifestyle, and much more. But what is success? Who determines what success is? And are we all called to run after success all our lives? Again, I'm not saying that those elements, having a degree or having a nice car, or having a nice house, those elements are not bad. But I'd like to point out or emphasize it's the motive behind the chase. Are you doing it to prove yourself to others, or is it just a simple symbol in your life? Here is just a little recapitulation of what I've mentioned, of a few pillars of what success may look like to people. But what does it look like in Black communities? Well, the expectations are already high on what success is, or what it's supposed to look like. Our Black individuals only know the 2 times story version, or the 10 times story version. What do I mean by that? So, despite the many challenges, such as racial discrimination, for example, in our recent studies, or in our recent research in the lab, we have found that 60.5% of Black students suffer from racial discrimination while pursuing their studies. And how can that be a challenge? Is the fact that they already feel being discriminated for their race. They often have another pressure to just prove themselves. They often find that they have to put, I would say, 10 times more the effort to look the part, so that they could achieve whatever they need to achieve in whether with the career or a workplace. And that's not without mentioning microaggressions or abuse or other traumas in our Black individuals. To really emphasize my point, Green expressed her frustrations in this article by stating, unless we're knocking it out of the park, high achieving and outperforming our counterparts, we're just not doing well enough in the eyes of many. And for them, there's no room for mistake. For example, in my community, within my family as well, I had no choice. My career path, as well as my academic path right after high school, was already chosen for me. I had no option of choosing. Maybe I wanted to have some experience in the workplace, or maybe having or going to college. In my community, for you to be considered as a successful person, you need to go to university. University is the way. There's no other option. And why is that? Because oftentimes there's that narrative where college is deemed for people that are not smart, or they don't want to pursue a high-end career. And it's not, and that can be very problematic because with that constant pressure, we feel like we often have to surpass or go beyond what is physically demanded or just expected from us compared to our fellow colleagues of different ethnicities. Because my friends from different ethnicities don't have that pressure, or they don't have to feel the same way. And to drive on my point, I'd like to give the John Henryism as an example. I'm not sure if you've heard that. Excuse me. I'm not sure if you have heard that statement before. But the John Henryism study states that we have seen Black students work to the point of extreme illness and attempt to escape the constant threat of perceived intellectual inferiority, McGee said. We argue that the current enthusiasm for teaching African American students and the significant injustice of societal racism and the toll it takes is even those students who appear to be the most resilient and successful suffer a lot. The researchers compare the most successful Black students to a historical figure of John Henry, a slave who literally killed himself to prove his worth. Now, the John Henryism is a coping strategy often adopted by high-achieving African Americans who may unconsciously or now increasingly consciously sacrifice personal relationships and health to pursue their goals with a tenacity that can be medically and mentally deleterious, the study says. Dr. Sherman James, founder of the John Henryism theory, explains that this situation is often the cause of many health problems due to stresses of life such as diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, depression, etc. And this not only affects just a health sphere aspect, but also your socioeconomic status, your mental health, your family, etc. He concludes that all of this is just to preserve our dignity as human beings. And I'm sitting here, wow, like, is that what success is? Is success being successful, or is success really worth it for the sake of preserving our dignity?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amir, for this wonderful point on success. And we're going to now talk about the last point, which is going to be about mental health. And before going to that, we wanted to know, how do you take care of your mental health? And I think it can really depend on everyone. Some people like exercising or cooking, eating, going out, sleeping even. And I don't think there is anything that is the most relevant. But yeah, maybe if you want to write in the chat, like, how do you take care of your mental health when you're feeling down? For example, I know that now we are entering the final season, which can be quite stressful. So do you have any particular habits that you like to do to slow down and take care of yourself and your mental health? It can really be anything. Or physical activity, yeah. Oh, sports, cooking, reading, yeah. I think because it's true that those past 2 years we had to stay home a lot in front of our screen, so it's very fair at the fact that sometimes just going out and do some exercising can really bring yourself up. Oh, we have other things to go for a run or walk outside and talk to friends and family. Absolutely. Baking, bullet journaling, listening to music. Yes. Dancing too. So we have quite a lot of athletic people here. But that's good. That's good. So now, maybe if we go to the next slide, we have a little quote, I believe, yes, about the fact that mental health is not a destination, but it's a process, and it's not really about how you drive, but mostly where you are going. And I think that that's really key, because when we look at the definition of mental health, it includes our emotional, our psychological, and also our social well-being. And it affects how we think, how we feel, and even how we act. And it also helps to determine how we handle stress and how we relate to other people, and how we make healthy choices in our lives. So for example, when you're feeling down or not at your best, it's hard to even really talk to people and like make those connections. You just want to take some time for yourself. So taking care of our mental health is really important, because it can really impact our day-to-day life and our habits. And yes, so mental health is important at every stage of our life, from childhood to our adolescence, and from our adolescent to our adulthood. So it's really important, whether we are young or older. And something that is really important is the fact that it shouldn't be mistaken with the word mental illness, because a mental illness refers to the dysfunction or a condition of an individual that affects his or her way of thinking or feeling, or their behavior or moods. So those conditions deeply impact the day-to-day living, and it may also impact your ability to relate to other people. And I also want to make something very clear, because I know that we talked about the fact that you can have a bad day, but that doesn't mean that you have depression, for example, because a mental illness really has to be clinically diagnosed by a mental health professional. And that's really what the difference is between mental health and mental illness, because everyone has a mental health and everyone should take care of their mental health, but not everyone has a mental illness. And so to remember this difference between those two terms, because it can be sometimes confusing, you can think of it this way. So every year in Canada, 1 in 5 people experience a mental health problem or a mental illness, but in those 5 people, 5 in 5 of them have a mental health. So it's a bit more, it's more clear. But yeah, maybe we can go to the next slide. Yes, so those are some factors that can impact, have an effect on our mental health. So we have biological factors, which is related a bit to our family history of mental health problems. So is that something that you see in your family? So that can have an impact, because sometimes that's something that is transmitted from one generation to another. I don't want to say that it's every single time, obviously, but it can have an influence, or family history. There is also emotional factors, and also a social well-being factor. So those are more the social factors. So your surroundings, your friends, your family, because sometimes, I don't want to say all of the time, but our surroundings have an impact on our own mental health, because they can bring us up, or they can also bring us down. So make sure of who you are surrounding yourself with. And lastly, we also have a life experience and a psychological factor that can impact our mental health. Mm-hmm. But yeah. Oh yeah, and those are other factors that can have an impact on our mental health. So we have a society. So here are some of example that we can see. So for example, the inequality that there are in society, also racial discrimination against some people, that can have a big impact on the mental health of people who are victim of racism, for example, racial discrimination, as we mentioned, by so many ways. And I know we're going to talk a bit more about that later on in the presentation. But there is also, for example, a lack of access to education, even a lack of access to health services, for example, also your safety. When we look at the community, your own safety, do you feel safe where you live? Do you have somewhere to live even? Or do you feel isolated? I know that during COVID, a lot of us had to, everyone actually had to stay home. And if you are living alone, for example, it was really hard because then it's just you and yourself being alone all the time. So it can also have an impact on your mental health. The fact that you don't really have this social interaction other than the one that you have online. There is also your family. So the fact that you can have a family of mental illnesses, and also some individual factors, so lifestyle or your physical health. Oh, okay, I thought that you had the question. But yeah, and the last one is about mental health disparities. So about Black mental health, because there are a lot of things that that can have an impact on it, because Black mental health has been an ongoing battle within this community, because the community has suffered a lot due to the subjection of trauma through enslavement, for example, oppression, colonialism, racism, and segregation to history. So that's why it's important to shine light on Black mental health, because there are still a lot of stigmas surrounding mental health and mental illnesses within the Black community, which can represent an obstacle when you're trying to seek help and mental health help. And even when we look at the research that has been done on the subject, we find that, for example, Black people in Canada are more likely to experience challenges when you're trying to find a family physician. And it's an important gateway to mental health care, if I may say. And this is largely due to four things. But we have 14 on this slide, but we can think of so many other things. So those are really, for example, that can create those disparities in the mental health services. So first, we have a lack of trust in the medical system due to history. So we mentioned segregation, and also when we look at the for example, I'm in psychology, so I know that in some of my classes we talk a lot about some of the experience and experiment that has been done in the past, which were deeply racist and also discriminatory toward people from the BIPOC community. There is also reduced access to adequate insurance. So here it's really the fact that if you can't afford mental health services, obviously this is a big barrier because you can afford it and because it's too expensive and you don't have the means to have a good medical insurance. So this is also a disparity that we see. There is also a lack of culturally appropriate mental health care providers. So this really shows the importance for mental health professionals to be educated on the subject of mental health in those communities, so in those BIPOC communities, and to have this intercultural perspective when you are diagnosed as a patient, to make sure that you take into account their background and their experiences and what they face in their day-to-day life, which can be quite different to what you're living. And lastly, we have a history of discrimination in the mental health system, which is kind of related to the first point. So a lot of discrimination that has been done in the past in the medical and also mental health fields, which is we can still see the impacts that had not today on those communities. So those are some of the explanation that we can say about the mental health disparities.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Misty, for adding those points. And now we talked about different pillars. First being the identity of how there's a lot of things that can affect your identity, but in Black communities, we see that it's more of a self-naming and self-belonging. That's one of the reasons why you see this on social media or different platforms, that it's my people, or it's with our ancestors and stuff like that. We also talked about success, how success in the eyes of society could be, achieving accolades or goals, or being the number one to do everything, but also in the Black community, success can have a lot of double standards and just a lot of pressure for those individuals to really surpass every single time, whether other people from different ethnicities or just their family pressure a lot. And we tied it with mental health, how identity and success can often, if you have a negative perspective, if it can have a negative connotation to it, can affect your mental health. And that's not just only at a emotional standpoint, but also in a just medically speaking. We've have some researches done that some people in our Black communities, for example, because they were putting so much effort or putting a lot of toll into certain type of career, or just sacrificing a lot of relationships and other aspects in their lives, have had a lot of medical conditions that they're now recuperating from. We want our nurses, we want our students, we want our friends to live up to the most life possible, but we also want them to enjoy that point. We don't want people to end up and when they're in the 40s to not enjoy that lifestyle they've worked so hard for. And that's why we would like to emphasize the point that you don't have to struggle in silence, and that it is okay to seek professional help. Yes, I know there might be a lot of stereotypes or stigmas out there regarding seeking professional help, but at the end of the day, if you are not okay, it is better to seek professional help than to struggle in silence. So here we have a list of a few resources that are available to our community, with the links and other situations as well. We also have different things as well in our lab that could also help out. And just here are references. And would like to thank you for listening, for participating as well, and open up the floor for any questions or just discussion or comments or any feedback regarding the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, you can write into chat if you want to, or even to open your mic. Oh, thank you, Kelly. Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming. It was really a pleasure to talk about mental health, and we really appreciate you for coming to our presentation. So I think Samira, we can stay a bit longer in case people want to or have a question. Maybe.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for that presentation. I really appreciated you guys sharing your own personal insights and just kind of the research you've also been doing to kind of add to it. But I'm a nursing student, and I know there's also a few nursing students here on this call too. And we just thought, it's so important. Like you mentioned, there's so many issues within the healthcare system regarding how Black individuals who come looking for help don't always get the same level of help or quality of help as people of different ethnicities and races. And so what would you say is kind of the best way to be more intentional about just being more culturally sensitive, I guess, when we're providing care?
That's a very good question. I'll go first, and Leslie, if you want to add anything. There's honestly a lot of ways I could answer that question, but I think a first approach would be to be open, and to listen. because oftentimes a lot of people in our Black communities come with a lot of baggage, and not everyone, is catered or has the experience to best accommodate that individual, and to be there and to listen and stuff like that. So I would say to listen, to show that this person that's trying to seek help is validated and that there is help. It might not be from you, or it might not be from your friends, but there is help out there. So I think to give that that sensitivity is to make sure that we're there to listen and to validate however the individual is feeling. But also, I think I know a lot of our research in the lab talks about how we can, go through a lot of not trainings, but procedures or processes of anti-racism and stuff like that, how to best approach. So I think being exposed to certain work trainings or stuff like that could also help, just so that you do have the experience, not just if it's not with the verbal, but also the non-verbal aspect as well works towards that. But Lucy, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to what I've said, but I think those two things could often help in approaching and just being more sensitive to that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I love what you just said about listening, because I first wanted to go with educating yourself, because obviously you don't know everything, and it's okay to not know everything about everyone, because there are so many different cultures and tradition even. Oh, sorry about that. Hope it wasn't too loud. So yeah, it's true that it's very important to educate yourself on those different type of experiences that people may have. But it's true that the listening is actually one of the most important things. And it's such a shame, because I actually had a video, but I don't remember the exact title, otherwise I would have shared it now. But it was about I think it was a man in an organization, because when we look at, for example, the dynamic between men and women in organization, sometimes there are a lot of sexism, and it was basically a man saying that women are so hard to understand, and I never know what they want. They're not clear and stuff. And the woman was actually trying to explain it, like what was the problem and stuff. And he kept just cutting her. And that's why I love what you said about listening, because I think that you just have to listen to other people and what they have to say, what they want to share. So yeah, I would just add that. But
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much.
I actually have a question for those who are in nursing. I remember when I first got into university, and I was amongst a few groups, because there's a lot of clubs in university, and a lot of, when it's not the pandemic, a lot of activity going on at the university as well. And so I think which is one of the greatest advantages to the university. But I was talking to a few nursing students, and one thing they had said, because we were just sharing about the programs that we're in and stuff like that. And one thing that still stuck with me till now is that they would often mention to the fact that the students that are struggling, the students that or unfortunately have committed suicide or try to, that's not being talked about. And that it's always like, oh yeah, once you have the degree, this is what you'll be able to do with it, or this is what, it will fulfill you and stuff like that. But the struggle throughout the achievement throughout the career is not being mentioned. And so I don't know if it's still the same narrative, or if it's still the same thing till today, especially after coming now off out of a pandemic. But how would you say, or what would, for those who are here for the nursing student, what would you have wanted that would have been more spoken about regarding the struggles or regarding any other challenges that you guys have gone through, because I know that it's not easy, especially throughout the pandemic as well.
For sure, that's a good question. I don't mean to kind of take away from your original presentation, but yeah, just I think in general, like, because there's this hero discourse of nurses being, kind of invincible, and no matter what, they'll always push through and they'll always be there for people. I think a lot of the struggles of the work itself, and for nursing students just having to learn and work at the same time through the pandemic, and kind of be exposed to this career from the pandemic, like as the beginning of their nursing career, it's pretty intimidating and it can be very overwhelming. And it definitely has been overshadowed throughout the pandemic because, and I mean, just with so many things happening in the world on top of that. So yeah, I think just like a more realistic discussion and conversation about what it's really like, and just recognizing that in the end, like, we're all human beings, and we have our struggles, and what you see on the outside isn't always kind of what goes on behind the scenes, and that there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So just, I guess, like, recognizing that and just having more real and honest conversations, I think, would have been really necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. I think sometimes we can often cotton candy what the career can look like and the studies can look like and stuff like that, and not have, like you said, what's going on behind the scenes. Thank you everyone for coming. If there's no any questions or any comments or feedback, I believe that will be it. In terms of our lab, we do have upcoming presentations or activities, especially as now we'll be able to do more things in person as well. So we'll definitely keep you guys up to date regarding that. But Lacey, did you want to add anything?
Not really. Just thank you so much for coming and being with us this afternoon. I don't really have anything else. Take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Have a nice day.
Take care, everyone. Have a nice day. Thank you, Joanne, for collaborating with us and the Beating Burnout Committee.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We're so glad that we had an opportunity to bring this, kind of spread more awareness, of course, just always finding more ways, and this was a great opportunity. So hopefully we can do more collaborations in the future, and just kind of make it more of a regular thing, and not just like a one-time, So yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day, guys.
Thank you, you too. Bye. Everyone.